The Trump administration is bailing on efforts to protect its allies from Russian information and hybrid warfare. Just why is Europe in panic and Vladimir Putin loving it? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's talk about what appears to be Vladimir Putin's next target in Europe. So this is about Russia ramping up its disinformation campaign against Moldova. Now, we know that in the last Moldovan election, it was found to have had widespread interference by Russia. In fact, a dual citizen in the last election ran on what appeared to be a massively corrupt campaign orchestrated by Russia. So much so that Russia was, or this guy's campaign was actively bribing rural Moldovans to simply vote for him. They found that, of course, his viral social media campaign was almost entirely engineered by bots and was funded entirely by Moscow. And so it was obvious, again, last year that the Moldovans were the target of Russia's next influence operation. And we can see on the map here, let's pull up a little map of of Moldova. You can see that geographically, it makes perfect sense that it's going to be Moscow's next target because, well, you can see that here is Ukraine. Literally, Russian forces occupy as far south as right here. So it's just an easy hop, skip, and a jump over to Moldova. And it's also worth noting that the breakaway region, quote unquote, of Transnistria is already a Russian-dominated government or pseudo-government. And this level of Russian, I don't know what to call it, well, there you go. A document written in 2021 by Russia's FSB titled, quote, Strategic Objectives of the Russian Federation in the Republic of Moldova sets out a 10-year plan to destabilize the country using energy blackmail. This is to say, co-opting its power facilities and its political elite to make them favorable to Russia and the Russian Orthodox Church. And Russia was like, no, this leaked plan with FSB branding in FSB language was totally fake. Again, in 2023, Russia canceled a 2012 decree in which they affirmed Moldovan sovereignty, which is weird for a country that you don't want to take over. And, right, in, of course, 2023, the Moldovan caught a Russian spy ring literally on the rooftop of the Russian embassy in Moldova's capital. So this whole thing is obviously, it's fairly obvious that Russia has designs on Moldova. And so the U.S., of course, being a defender of democracy and valuing our allies, because, well, frankly, our allies are pretty essential to America's prosperity and security, stands up for Moldova, right? And what do? Well, we counter Russia's mis and disinformation attempts with our own free information environment, right? So that means that making sure that independent Moldovan reporting, right, gets funded by grants from this Department of State and USAID. For example, USAID also countered that Russian energy blackmail by literally opening, funding, and constructing our own Moldovan power plants that Russia was unable to get used to, again, blackmail Moldova with high electricity prices. All of these things, right? Radio Free Europe, Voice of America, broadcasting in Moldovan languages. All of these things are counterpoints to Putin's efforts. And the key, right, the reason they work so well is because they provide true value, right? They don't rely on lies, they rely on truth. And again, in general, the Moldovan public, Moldovan voters, they say, listen, I trust these sources, because I see them report true facts, whether it's beneficial or a detraction from, this political party or that political party. Sometimes even U.S. funded outlets are critical of U.S. policy or cover bad news about U.S. policy or negative stories about U.S. policy. And that raises your credibility tremendously, right? The same way if you had a coach that was like, hey, man, you're doing X really well, but you're doing Y really badly. You would trust that coach way more than you would trust a coach who only says you're doing great versus a coach who says, actually, everything you do is terrible, right? At some point you go, I'm not going to listen to this guy. So that's been the U.S. sort of counterweight strategy in Moldova. Well, I say was because, well, the U.S. has simply said, why don't we just stop, right? And of course, Russia has said, wow, what perfect timing, America. Because as you're stopping your efforts to support the Moldovans, right, which you may know that, again, a lot of those grants coming from USAID, which was destroyed by Elon Musk, which is kind of weird because there's also a lot of credible reports about Elon Musk being in frequent contact with Vladimir Putin. And even Vladimir Putin reportedly offering significant, there you go, being offered significant assistance in his space program by Russia. Huh. It's pretty crazy, right? It's pretty crazy how Elon Musk just accidentally served Russian interests perfectly, timed perfectly, because one of the things that has emerged in the last year is a Russian disinformation campaign against Moldova that is unbelievably ramped up in scale, right? According to, again, this NewsGuard, there have been no less than 34 stories directed at, sort of pushed by Russian-linked accounts into Moldova in the last 12 months, or sorry, in the first 3 months of the year. Last year, there were 0 detected false stories pushed by these same Russian bot networks. And what are they? Well, they're pretty easy to detect. Here's the top 5 in terms of how much engagement they got. Top story was Fox News reports that Moldova's government sold 50,000 hectares of land to investment company BlackRock. Now, again, what makes this story great is that it borrows the credibility of a recognized outlet. It depicts a large but not preposterous scheme, and of course, it has a real villain that really does buy land and investments, but BlackRock doesn't buy land in Moldova. Next biggest story, again, same thing. The BBC reports 42% of absentee ballots in the 2024 Moldovan elections were cast by dead people, right? Again, reducing Moldovan credibility in the electoral system, then reducing, pushing a narrative of corruption against the Moldovan president, Maria Sandu, right? Vogue, again, borrowing credibility of a real outlet, reported that Maria Sandu ranks 6th in heads of state with the most expensive wardrobes. Maria Sandu called the most corrupt European leader by The Economist, which is truly brilliant given that Vladimir Putin is also a European leader. And E! News reporting that a planned visit to Moldova by 3 Hollywood stars was canceled because USAID funding was pulled, which is interesting, right? You can see, again, this USAID is a money laundering operation. That's also something we heard from Vladimir Musk, from Vladimir Putin's bestie, Elon Musk. And again, what I want to point out is that when people are like, but Elon said he found huge criminal enterprises. Well, Elon Musk, who has no experience in government and whose employees averaged age about 22, said that they were sure they found criminal corruption inside USAID. But the part where they're charged with a crime, you notice how nobody got charged with a crime for any of the systematic corruption that Elon was sure he found. That's because there wasn't any. There was no real evidence. Whenever anybody sort of tried to peel back the evidence, they found that it was just regular accounting in a government database written in code that the 22-year-olds didn't understand, because these government databases, in most cases, were engineered around the time those kids were born. So, again, you notice that you just hear a lot of these narratives sound familiar to all of us, right? Again, USAID is corrupt and a money laundering operation. That sounds familiar, right? Your leader is corrupt and on the payroll of large companies. Absentee ballots, fake dead people. all these sound like narratives that, well, the Republican Party pushed prior to the U.S. election this past year. Remember? Sound familiar, right? A stolen election in 2020, right? Joe Biden and his son Hunter, unbelievably corrupt, impossibly corrupted, right? And of course, Hollywood stars on the payroll, everyone on the payroll of USAID. So you can see Russia pushing these narratives, right, on Moldova, and the U.S. simply bailing on it. But it's not just Moldova that we're bailing on, right? You can see there's also some preposterous ones, right? I don't even know if YouTube would let me repeat that story aloud, but just sort of just weird stuff, right? Again, kind of sort of targeting this like wokeification. They're like, oh, Maya Sandu is so woke. She's, and positioning Russia again as this like this defender of conservative, true Russian values. That's a really classic one, which again is worth noting that, arguing that Moldova is getting wokeified or whatever is already pretty dumb. But you can also see what's troubling, what's really worrying and should worry all of us is that Russia is getting better at this. You can see here that they've generated an AI podcast host or an AI news host that, again, is promoting these. So what used to be like pretty cringe stuff, you would see these like badly written Russian translated posts just run through Google Translate. You don't have that anymore. You have excellent, highly polished AI generated content that it feels real and credible to viewers. And that's the thing. It's like culturally aligned. It uses phrases and euphemisms that are super familiar to a native speaker. And it uses, again, legitimate looking creators. So this is really scary stuff. And the fact the U.S. is doing like even its cringy efforts, right? Like the U.S. is not putting out stuff like this. It's not even really enabling, like it might be enabling some true creators to try to push back, but we're not even doing that, right? We're not even doing our regular pushback on this sort of thing. But what's more troubling, again, is that we're also bailing on our allies in the Baltics, right? So the Baltic states, right, are also being subject to this. And as we've talked about, the Baltics are having their funding also cut. And this is being a very nice headline by the AP saying European countries near Russia puzzled by U.S. plans to cut defense spending. And it's not so much puzzled as it is panicked. Panicked is the word you're looking for. And this security assistance, right? One, the popular narrative by the right, by the American right going into this election was that, it's NATO's fault. We have to defend NATO, but we don't have an obligation to defend countries outside of NATO. Well, apparently we don't have an obligation to defend NATO countries either. Funding under the Baltic Security Initiative, which finances weapons purchased by countries on NATO's eastern flank, like the Baltics, is being pulled. And here's the thing. Like, President Trump says, hey, our plan is to make sure Europe takes responsibility for its own defense. But it's just like, it's like a kid, right? Your kid's 18, you go, listen, I want them to take responsibility for their own finances. Well, what's the way you would do it? What's the smart way to do it? Probably to give them gradually increasing responsibilities. That's what my parents did to me. They said, listen, okay, you want a car? All right, great. We'll teach you to drive on ours, but then, we'll help you get to work, but you got to save up and you got to buy your own car. And then once you do that, we'll help you pay for the insurance and the gas. And then they go, okay, well, like once you do that, you go, okay, let's talk about maybe you are going to pay your own cell phone bill. And then we'll talk about what it means to pay your own rent and how you do that. And it was gradual over time, right? That's how these kind of transitions, when you take responsibility for yourself, go. And it's no different in a country because remember, if you're the Baltics and you're used to saying the U.S. saying, hey, listen, we can fund your we can help you buy these weapons. We will literally fund you buying U.S. weapons. And then you suddenly go, okay, well, we're going to pull this. You go, hey, I'm going to give you 3 years of warning. right? So you say, listen, we're going to help you find new contractors that you can purchase from. We're going to give you time to pass laws to maybe raise your taxes or come up with some other sort of revenue generation mechanism to purchase these weapons yourselves. We're going to do everything we can to sort of transition you towards a more independent posture, if that's your goal, which again, given that the Baltics are pretty important NATO allies and sort of symbols for the U.S. commitment to defend the rest of NATO, and the fact that we're talking about not even billions of dollars, but just hundreds of millions of dollars, like literal fucking peanuts by U.S. Tax standards. But if that's your goal, you do it gradually, right? And so if you want somebody, let's say your goal was to fuck your kid and make sure they have no chance of thriving on their own or standing up and defending themselves. Let's say you wanted to make them as weak and failure prone as possible. What would you do? Well, what you would do is get them totally dependent on you for everything, right? And then it'd be the equivalent of my parents saying, don't worry about the car. We'll take care of everything related to a car. You don't have to think about anything. We'll give you a card for gas. We'll put you on our insurance. You won't have to pay it. You won't have to do your cell phone. And then the day you turn 18, you kick them out and you cancel everything. So they not only do they not have the skill set to do it, but they literally don't even know where to go to do these things. They have no clue. That's how you screw somebody. And so that's what we're doing to the Baltics right now, right? Zero notice, absolutely kicking them to the curb, making them as weak and vulnerable as humanly possible, which again is pretty weird for somebody who says, no, we're for Mr. Peace through strength. The timing is like so perfect that, the actions, if you throw out the president's words and if you assume the president just says whatever fucking thing he wants and you judge by their actions, these actions are indistinguishable from withdrawing support and giving Russia every single thing they've wanted for the last 15 years.